I heard it before I saw their faces. Just dump all 13 kids on her. She won't say no. Indy's voice drifted from the kitchen casual and cruel, like she was talking about unloading groceries instead of human beings. The words hit me harder than the December wind curling under the porch door. I stood there, one hand still gripping the handle of a grocery bag heavy with my father's Christmas shopping, the scent of cinnamon rolls mixed with disinfectant, too clean, too false. Tucker's voice followed lower, amused. Yeah, she's too soft. Claire can handle them. Dad, too. They're basically the same, can't say no to anyone. I didn't move. I wanted to believe I'd misheard, that the laughter echoing off those polished countertops wasn't my brother's. But then Indy said the part that changed everything. Free babysitting, free food, and she even cleans up after. It's like having a full-time maid with a psychology degree. The last line was punctuated by the sound of wine being poured. I felt something inside me shift, not break, just slide into place the way a door finally clicks shut. 2 years ago, I would have cried. Now, I just listened. The kitchen light spilled across the hallway, warm and deceptive. On the counter lay the grocery receipt, still peeking from the bag, $3,287. My father's handwriting scrawled across it, Family Christmas. I used to think the word family meant belonging. Tonight, it sounded like a bill no one intended to pay. I set the bags down quietly, my fingers numb from the cold and the realization. Their laughter blended with the hum of the refrigerator, the clink of glass against marble, the rhythm of two people so confident in their cruelty they didn't lower their voices. Indy's tone softened mockingly. Claire's perfect for this. She needs to feel useful. She'll say yes like she always does. Watch. I didn't need to watch. I'd lived that scene 100 times. When Mom died, I thought grief would pull us closer. Instead, it built walls, Tucker behind his pride, Dad behind guilt, and me behind obligation. I'd been the caretaker, the listener, the fixer, the invisible daughter who filled in every silence so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. Tonight, standing in the hallway, I realized they liked me invisible. They needed me that way. The insult didn't sting, it clarified. I slipped my phone from my pocket, opened my notes app, and typed one sentence, December 23rd. They forgot. I listen. I left the groceries by the door and walked back into the snow. Portland's air burned cold in my lungs, but it felt cleaner than the air inside that house. Christmas lights glittered on wet pavement, all pretending warmth, and I caught my reflection in a storefront window. Steady eyes, tight jaw, no tears. Just focus. Grief had made me gentle. Gaslighting had made me quiet. But betrayal made me strategic. As I unlocked my car, I looked down at the receipt again, at my father's neat signature, and whispered into the darkness, "You deserve better than this, Dad." The words weren't for him. They were for me. Because what they didn't know, what they never understood, was that silence isn't weakness. It's the sound before strategy. And that night, for the first time in 2 years, I finally knew exactly what I was going to do. Grief turns ordinary people into servants of guilt. I used to believe helping my family was how I honored my mother, but over time, every favor became a leash. After Mom died, Indy moved in on the first wave of casseroles and condolences. She was efficient, organized, and smiling in that way women smile when they're already measuring control. Let me handle things, she'd said, hand on my father's arm at the funeral, voice dripping sympathy. You just focus on getting through this, Archer! My father had nodded, grateful for direction in the chaos of loss. Tucker followed her lead, his grief morphing into dependency. I saw it start with small things, the utilities in Dad's name, the groceries on his card. When I questioned it, Tucker's tone hardened. You're overthinking again, Claire. We're just keeping things simple. Simple meant convenient. For them, they called every manipulation helping. When Tucker couldn't afford a new transmission, Dad paid. When Indy wanted a new kitchen, she called it an investment in family gatherings. And I stayed quiet because conflict felt like betrayal. I told myself I was protecting peace, but I was really protecting their comfort. I still remember one night 6 months after Mom's funeral. Tucker had exploded over a bank charge, some mix-up about the joint account he'd created with Dad for emergencies. He'd yelled so loudly the neighbors called to check in. After he left, Dad sat at the table, head in his hands, whispering, "He's just stressed, Claire." He didn't mean it. but the bruise on his wrist said otherwise. That was the first time I noticed how often Dad flinched when Tucker raised his voice. Indy perfected the art of soft cruelty. She'd gaslight with a smile, say things like, "You're such a perfectionist, Claire. No wonder you're single." Every insult was disguised as concern. When I started pulling back, declining dinner invites, limiting calls, she told Dad Claire's drifting away from the family. Maybe she needs therapy. The irony made me laugh later, but at the time I just felt small. By the second Christmas without Mom patterns had solidified. Dad paid for everything, tree gifts, dinner, even Tucker's property taxes one year. He told me it made him feel useful. I told myself not to interfere. I was the observer, the daughter trained to understand behavior, but not challenge it. You can't outsmart emotional abuse if you're afraid of being labeled ungrateful. That night, after hearing Indy's plan, I went home and opened Mom's old recipe box. It still smelled faintly of vanilla and cedar. Tucked between cookie recipes was a note in her handwriting: "Help them grow Claire. Don't help them become helpless." She'd written it years ago about Tucker when he'd dropped out of college and called her crying. She'd sent him money anyway, of course, but she'd known the danger of enabling. I'd forgotten that lesson. I sat at the kitchen table with the note in one hand and my laptop open in the other, pulling up every transaction from Dad's accounts. The numbers told a story of slow erosion, pensions, drained credit balances, rising sympathy turned into obligation. $2, $100 in gifts for grandchildren, $847 in groceries, $340 in decorations, $18,000 this year alone. The total didn't surprise me. What did was how methodical the exploitation had become. Each charge labeled family expense. Each month a little more of Dad disappearing. I typed another line in my notes. Emotional labor equals currency. Silence equals consent. Then I stared at those words until they blurred. I wasn't angry yet. Anger comes fast and burns out. What I felt was precision, the same quiet clarity before surgery. My patients often told me that trauma repeats itself until you recognize the pattern. That night, I recognized it. My family was the patient, and I'd been enabling the illness. The wind rattled the windows as I gathered receipts, bank statements, text screenshots, every proof of what had been happening. I placed them neatly in a manila folder and wrote one label across the top in black ink: Christmas plan. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was correction, the kind that teaches, not destroys. But first, they'd have to see what they'd built and who they'd turned into while pretending it was love. The next morning began with numbers. Cold, silent, merciless numbers that spoke louder than any apology my brother would ever give. I laid every receipt across my kitchen table, each one a snapshot of quiet exploitation: the $847 grocery trip Dad had charged to his card, the $2,100 in Christmas gifts for grandchildren he could barely remember the names of anymore, the $340 for decorations Indy had picked out but never reimbursed. The totals formed a picture no one wanted to see: 1 month of my father's pension erased to fund their illusion of family. I poured coffee, black and bitter, the kind Mom used to say could wake the dead. Maybe she was right, because the woman sitting at that table wasn't grieving anymore. She was taking inventory. My cursor blinked on an empty spreadsheet. I titled it Pattern of Use. Under date. I logged every expense I could trace, matching bank statements to text messages, receipts to memory. Dad's Visa card ending in 3447 had paid for Tucker's car repair, Indy's yoga retreat, the twins' summer camp. The sheer volume of it was obscene. I cross-referenced Venmo transfers. I'd sent Indy nearly $8,000 over 2 years for emergencies that always seemed to coincide with new handbags or school events she'd forgotten to budget for. Each line item was a confession they'd never make aloud. I clicked record on my phone and spoke softly, my own voice even. Case file: Thompson family. Subject: financial and emotional dependency. Method: guilt, gaslighting, normalization. The calmness unsettled me. I sounded detached, almost clinical. But detachment was how I survived my work as a psychologist. Tonight, it would help me survive my family. I scrolled through old text threads, watching patterns unfold. Thanks, Claire, you're a lifesaver. Couldn't have done it without you. Gratitude weaponized. Every thank you was just an IOU disguised as affection. I wasn't angry. Anger was for people who still expected fairness. What I felt was closer to precision, a focus sharpened by years of silence. Around noon, I called the credit union to confirm my suspicions. Yes, Archer Thompson's account showed multiple linked payments to Tucker's household. Yes, there were recurring withdrawals labeled family support. No, none of them were authorized jointly. The representative's voice softened when I told her my father was 72 and widowed. Ma'am, do you suspect elder exploitation? I paused. The word exploitation felt heavy clinical, but it was the truth. Yes, I said quietly, by his own son. After I hung up, I sat in stillness. Outside, the rain had turned to sleet, tiny shards ticking against the window like a metronome. My reflection stared back at me in the glass eyes, tired but alert. I opened a new document titled simply Evidence. Every transaction screenshot and photo went inside. Then I began writing notes as if preparing testimony. Exhibit A, emotional manipulation through obligation. Exhibit B, financial exploitation masked as tradition. Exhibit C, silence sustained by guilt. The more I typed, the lighter I felt. It wasn't joy. It was release the moment truth begins to separate from delusion. For 2 years, I'd been drowning in the language of family sacrifice, loyalty, forgiveness. None of it meant anything without respect. I thought of Dad sitting at his kitchen table every night calculating love in dollars. He believed generosity could hold broken people together. I knew better now. It only teaches them how to take without guilt. When the clock struck 3, I stacked the papers into a single folder and slid it into my leather briefcase. Across the top in neat black ink, I wrote Christmas plan. My handwriting looked deliberate, lawyerly. For the first time, the plan wasn't about saving Christmas. It was about saving dignity. I leaned back, exhaled slowly, and whispered to the empty room. They think I'm soft. Let's see how soft strategy feels. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise to myself, a quiet declaration that this year, silence would finally speak louder than their laughter. By midnight, the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock Mom had loved. I sat across from my father at the kitchen table, the glow of the single lamp soft against his lined face. He was folding napkins, preparing for the big Christmas breakfast he thought we'd share tomorrow. His hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from exhaustion. You shouldn't be doing this alone, Dad, I said. He smiled faintly, that same gentle smile that used to make me feel safe as a child. It keeps me busy, he said. Besides, it's Christmas. They're counting on me. I studied him, the quiet weariness in his eyes, the resignation masquerading as love. You don't have to buy love, you know, I said softly. He paused, napkin half folded. It's not about buying Claire. It's about feeling needed. There it was, the phrase I'd heard my whole life. Feeling needed, not loved, not respected. Needed. There's a difference between being needed and being used, I said. He looked at me surprised, then sighed. Maybe. But after your mother passed, the house felt too empty. At least this way I hear laughter again. I wanted to tell him that the laughter he heard was mockery disguised as gratitude, but instead I reached across the table and took his hand. Do you remember what Mom used to say? Help them grow. Don't help them become helpless. His eyes softened. She said that about Tucker, didn't she? She said it about all of us, I replied. For a moment, silence filled the room, thick, heavy understanding. Then I pulled out the manila folder and placed it in front of him. I found something today, I said carefully. It's everything you've spent on them this year. His brow furrowed as he flipped through the pages. The further he read, the more his expression collapsed into disbelief. This can't be right, he murmured. It's right, I said quietly. You've given them $18,000 in 1 year, Dad. More than half your pension. He stared down at the receipts, his voice breaking. I just wanted to make them happy. They were happy, I said, but not for the reasons you think. I watched him absorb the truth, grief shifting into something sharper, shame. Don't, I said quickly, squeezing his hand. This isn't about guilt, it's about choice. You still have one." He looked up confused. "What do you mean?" I took a breath. "Tomorrow, you're not going there. You're not cooking, not paying, not babysitting. You're doing something for yourself." "For myself?" He sounded like the idea was foreign. "Yes. Do you remember Marlo Evans, the director at the community kitchen you and Mom volunteered at every Christmas?" His eyes lit with recognition. "Of course. Good woman. I called her," I said. "They're short on volunteers this year. They're serving 500 meals tomorrow. I told her we'd be there at 6 a.m. His face softened, then tightened. "Claire, I can't just leave them." "They left you years ago," I said gently. "You just never noticed." The words landed hard, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded slowly like he'd been waiting for someone else to say it out loud. "All right," he said finally, his voice trembling. 6 a.m. then." I smiled. "I'll drive." Later, while he went to bed, I moved through the house quietly transferring the wrapped gifts from under the tree into boxes labeled community donations. I left one envelope on the kitchen counter, the note written in his handwriting. "Gone to find peace. The gifts are in the basement. Dad." As I turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the window again, calm, deliberate, unafraid. For years, they'd mistaken my silence for weakness. Tomorrow, they'd learn what silence can build when it stops serving others and starts serving truth. I walked past the glowing Christmas tree, its lights flickering against the dark window, and whispered, "Merry Christmas, Mom. I'm bringing him home to you." By the time the clock struck 2, the house had settled into a deep, contented quiet. I moved like a shadow through each room, packing the last of the gifts into cardboard boxes marked for the community kitchen. The ornaments on the tree glimmered faintly in the dark, their reflections warping across the window like distant stars. This was the hour when grief used to feel loudest, when I'd imagine Mom's footsteps on the stairs or her voice humming carols under her breath. Tonight, the silence felt different, strategic, almost sacred. Every sound mattered. Every movement was a decision. I loaded the boxes into the trunk of my car, careful not to wake Dad. The December air bit at my cheeks, sharp and clean. I'd always hated Portland winters for their gray monotony, but now the darkness felt useful, a cover for reconstruction. I double-checked my checklist receipts, donation letters, camera batteries, printed news contacts. I wasn't improvising. I was executing. Inside, I left only what I wanted them to find. On the counter, the folded note in Dad's handwriting, the coffee pot, prepped but empty, a clean kitchen stripped of chaos. On the fridge, I pinned the grocery receipt for $3.208 with a small magnet shaped like a Christmas bell. Evidence. Then, with one final look at the quiet living room, I turned off the lights and let the house disappear into night. In my car, I pulled up my contacts and scrolled to Marlo Evans. She'd answered my call earlier with her trademark warmth. "Claire Thompson, it's been too long. Your parents were legends here. I'd told her we wanted to honor them by volunteering this year." She hadn't asked why my voice shook slightly when I said it. She simply said, "Be here by 6, there'll be aprons waiting." But I'd made more than one call tonight. A contact from college, now a local journalist, agreed to stop by the community kitchen in the morning for a feel-good story. I also forwarded a redacted copy of the financial summary to a lawyer who specialized in elder exploitation. It wasn't accusation, it was documentation. Legal light in the dark. I leaned back in my seat, letting my breath fog the windshield. Outside, the snow had started again. Soft flakes swirling in the glow of the street lamp. Portland slept unaware that tomorrow one family's Christmas tradition would shatter on live television. Not from malice, but from mathematics, from simple cause and effect. I opened my phone's recorder again, my voice steady low. Entry 4. Intent to demonstrate boundaries through transparency. Outcome uncertain. Objective restoration, not destruction. It sounded clinical, almost detached, but I wasn't cold. I was clear. For the first time in 2 years, clarity didn't hurt. A text buzzed at 2:46 a.m. from Indy. "Don't forget, breakfast is at your place, Claire. Be ready for chaos, haha." I stared at it until the humor rotted in my hands. I typed nothing back. Silence, after all, was part of the lesson. Before heading to bed, I set 2 alarms, one for 4:30, another for 5 Hawaii. I wanted time to watch the sunrise with Dad before we left. Then I placed the manila folder labeled Christmas Plan inside my tote bag, our insurance policy. Upstairs, Dad's door was cracked open. I peeked inside. He was sleeping peacefully, for once, his face unburdened. I thought about all the years he'd carried this family's weight, quietly mistaking servitude for love. Tomorrow he'd learn that love could stand upright. Tomorrow he'd see what respect looked like when it wasn't bought. I stood there a long moment before whispering, "Rest now. I've got the morning shift." When I finally lay down, sleep came in pieces, half plans, half memories. I dreamed of my mother in her red apron at the old community kitchen, flour dust in her hair, smiling at my father across the steam of fresh biscuits. "Look at us," she'd said. "Exactly where we belong." When I woke, her words still echoed, only now they weren't nostalgia. They were coordinates. The alarm went off at 4:30 sharp and merciless. I turned it off before the second ring. Downstairs, the air smelled faintly of coffee and cold wood. Dad was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table in his flannel shirt, staring at the note we'd left the night before. "You sure about this?" he asked without looking up. I nodded. Completely. He exhaled the kind of long sigh that lets grief leave the body molecule by molecule. "Then let's go feed some people," he said and stood. Outside, the sky was a bruised blue snow crunching under our boots. As we drove through the silent streets of Portland, Christmas lights blinked like false promises in the windows we passed. Dad stared out at them, hands folded in his lap. "They'll be expecting me," he said. "Let them," I replied. "You've been expected your whole life. It's time they learn disappointment." He didn't answer, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch, almost a smile. The community kitchen glowed like a lighthouse against the dawn. Steam rose from vents, volunteers hurried in with trays and laughter. Inside, warmth wrapped around us. Marlo spotted us immediately. "Claire," she called, embracing me, then turning to Dad. "Archer Thompson, back from retirement." He laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years. "Couldn't stay away." She handed us aprons. "You remember where everything is." For the next 2 hours, we moved like clockwork. Pancakes flipped, coffee poured, hands shook, names exchanged. Dad was in his element, steady, patient kind. The local news crew arrived just after 7, cameras sweeping the room. A reporter smiled at Dad. "Sir, may we interview you?" He nodded, eyes crinkling. "If you want the truth, talk to the real heroes," he said, gesturing at the volunteers. The camera lingered on him anyway, on the quiet dignity that had always defined him. Meanwhile, across town, Tucker and Indy pulled into Dad's driveway at exactly 8. Indy's voice carried across the frozen air. "Where's the coffee? It's freezing." Inside, they found the note on the counter. "Gone to find peace. The gifts are in the basement. Dad." For a moment, silence, then panic. "What does this mean?" Indy shouted. Tucker tore open the basement door. 13 perfectly wrapped presents sat on the workbench, each labeled in Dad's neat handwriting. Indy's face flushed red. He bought everything. "We didn't even know." Tucker's voice rose brittle. "He's overreacting." Upstairs, the kids started crying. One wanted pancakes. Another wanted Wi-Fi. Indy's voice cracked like glass. "Call him." Tucker dialed. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. By 9:00, the house was chaos, burnt toast, spilled cocoa, whining kids, rising tempers, the comfort of entitlement collapsing under the weight of reality. At the soup kitchen, I glanced at Dad between serving trays. He was laughing with a young volunteer, showing her how to keep pancakes from sticking. The camera flashed. For once, the attention was deserved. By noon, the first wave of families had been served. Marlo's voice echoed above the chatter. "This man's been volunteering since before most of you were born," she said, pointing to Dad. Applause filled the room. He blushed. The reporter smiled, turning to me. "You must be proud." I looked at him, the steady rhythm of his hands, the peace on his face. "I am," I said simply. Back at Tucker's, the last thread of control snapped. Indy threw her phone across the counter. "He's ignoring us on purpose." Tucker glared at the crumpled note. "We'll find him." but when he checked his notifications, something froze in his expression. There on his screen was a news alert. Local volunteers bring hope. On Christmas Day, meet Archer Thompson. A video thumbnail showed Dad ladling soup beside me, smiling under a paper hat. Indy stared at the screen, color draining from her face. Tucker's hand trembled as he hit play. The reporter's voice rang clear. After losing his wife, Archer Thompson and his daughter found new purpose by serving others. The camera zoomed in on Dad's face, content, proud, alive. Tucker didn't say a word. The sound of children's chatter filled the silence. Indy whispered, "They're talking about us." Tucker's reply was barely audible. "No," he said. "They're finally not." By mid-afternoon, the video had spread faster than any Christmas rumor Portland had ever seen. The local news station posted the clip on Facebook with the caption, "When kindness becomes a legacy." Within hours, it hit 1,000 shares. Comments flooded in, strangers thanking Dad for reminding them what the holiday was supposed to mean. Old students writing how he'd changed their lives, people calling him a Christmas angel. I watched from across the soup kitchen, drying trays by the sink, while Dad laughed with a line of volunteers. He hadn't looked at his phone once. The light from the windows haloed his face, and for the first time he didn't look small or old or forgotten. He looked whole. Around 4, Marlo rushed over, holding her phone like it was on fire. "Claire, you need to see this." She turned the screen toward me. The comment section had evolved. Someone had recognized our family. "Isn't that Tucker Thompson's dad?" one comment said. "The same guy who paid for their Disney trip last year." Another, "Funny how people exploit kindness and then act surprised when the truth shows up on the news." I scrolled through them slowly, heart steady. The public mirror was working. The narrative had shifted. We weren't the enablers anymore. We were the example. At 4:15, my phone buzzed Indy. Then Tucker. Then again. 15 missed calls in 10 minutes. I let them ring until the vibration stopped. Marlo raised an eyebrow. "You're not answering." "They'll find me soon enough," I said, "but not on their terms." Outside, the temperature had dropped. Volunteers passed out scarves to waiting families. Dad carried trays, humming under his breath. The camera crew had returned for a follow-up segment. The reporter smiled at him again. "You've inspired the city today, Mr. Thompson. Any message you'd like to share?" He wiped his hands on his apron, looked into the camera, and said, "When you're truly needed, time doesn't matter." I felt my throat tighten. That was the same line Mom used to say. The comments exploded again. "That's real family right there. Wish my kids appreciated me like that. What a beautiful man." Each one a spark burning away years of invisibility. Meanwhile, back at Tucker's house, their own mirror had cracked wide open. Emma, the eldest, texted me quietly. "They're freaking out. Mom's crying. Dad's pacing. The kids keep asking why Grandpa's on TV instead of here." I typed back, "Because that's where he's supposed to be." Around 5. "Overheard." Marlo touched my shoulder. "They'll come here, you know," she said softly. "They always do." I nodded. "Let them see what respect looks like." We kept working. The last of the meals were served, laughter echoing through the hall. People thanked Dad like he was some kind of saint, but he just kept saying, "I'm no saint, just late to the lesson." At 5:30, as we wiped down tables, a ripple moved through the volunteers. Someone had entered the room, 2 figures standing awkwardly near the doorway. Tucker and Indy. The sound of metal chairs scraping filled the silence. Their faces looked wrong here. Expensive coats forced smiles, eyes searching for control. Dad Tucker called softly, "We've been looking everywhere." His voice trembled, not from cold, but from exposure. Dad turned, wiping his hands on his apron, expression unreadable. "You found me," he said. "Now what?" Indy stepped forward, eyes glossy. We didn't know you'd gone." I saw the flicker of the reporter's camera light in the corner. The world was still watching. I folded a towel, placed it on the counter, and stood beside my father. The air hummed with anticipation. "You didn't have to know," I said evenly. "All you had to do was notice." Tucker's mouth opened, then closed. The entire room had gone still. The reporter whispered to his cameraman, "Keep rolling." For the first time, my family couldn't hide behind laughter or obligation. The story had shifted and they were standing in the wrong narrative. What they didn't realize yet was that the next chapter, the one about accountability, had already been written. Tucker stood frozen under the fluorescent lights, eyes darting from me to the camera crew and back again. He looked smaller than I remembered. The sound of the kitchen was a dull roar behind us, pots clinging, murmurs softening into silence. Everyone could sense what was coming. Indy took a hesitant step forward, her voice a trembling imitation of sincerity. "Dad, we're sorry if we made you feel unappreciated. It's been a hectic year, kids' Bill's life." "Stop," I said. My tone wasn't loud, but it sliced clean through her excuses. Every head turned toward me. "You didn't make him feel unappreciated. You used him. There's a difference." Tucker's jaw tightened. "That's not fair, Claire." I smiled without warmth. "Fairness hasn't been your concern for years." I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the manila folder labeled Christmas Plan. The paper rustled like a verdict being read. "These are receipts from the last 12 months. Groceries, parties, gifts, repairs. $18,000, half of Dad's pension. All paid in the name of family." I handed the folder to the nearby reporter who raised an eyebrow as he flipped through the pages. The camera tilted slightly, catching the exchange. Tucker's face drained of color. "You had no right to dig through his accounts. I had every right to protect him," I said. "Elder exploitation is a crime, Tucker. I just turned evidence into our family history." A sharp gasp rippled through the room. Marlowe, standing near the sink, crossed her arms, a silent show of support. Indy's mask cracked. "This is ridiculous. You're twisting everything. We've taken care of him since your mother died." "Taken care of him," I repeated. "You took from him. You drained him until generosity became servitude. You turned kindness into currency." My voice didn't shake. I didn't need to yell. The power wasn't in the volume. It was in the clarity. Tucker stepped forward, eyes pleading. He never said no. He wanted to help. "Because he thought saying yes was love," I said. "You taught him that silence was easier than conflict. That's not love. That's fear wearing a polite face." Dad spoke, then his voice quiet but steady. "You made me believe my worth depended on what I gave. You both did." Tucker opened his mouth, but no words came. The truth had stripped language from him. Behind us, the door opened. Two figures in plain suits entered Detective Ruiz and a legal aide from the Elder Protection Unit. I had called them 2 days ago, submitted the report and documentation. The timing, I'll admit, was deliberate. "Mrs. Thompson," the detective said to Indy, "we need to inform you that all shared financial accounts under Mr. Archer Thompson's name are temporarily frozen pending review." The color drained from Indy's face. Tucker turned on me, his voice breaking. "You did this?" "No," I said. "You did this. I just refused to keep cleaning up after it." The entire kitchen had gone silent except for the faint hum of the news camera. Somewhere behind me, someone whispered, "Good for her." Dad straightened his shoulders, a quiet authority returning to his posture. "You know," he said slowly, "for years I thought love meant saying yes to everything. But today, serving soup felt more like love than anything we've done as a family in a long time." Indy started crying loud theatrical sobs that drew no sympathy. Tucker just stood there pale and still as the weight of consequence settled around him like falling snow. The detective handed me a copy of the legal notice for record. "This will keep things safe while we review," he said. "We'll contact you after the holidays." I nodded. "Thank you." As they left, I turned back to my brother. "You'll have time to reflect, Tucker. That's the one resource you can't drain from Dad anymore." He looked at me with something between shame and disbelief. "You turned this into a spectacle," he whispered. "No," I said softly. "You did that the moment you confused love with leverage." And just like that, the cameras caught what no holiday picture ever had: a family's collapse, not in fury, but in truth. By the time we drove home that night, the city had gone quiet again. Christmas lights blinked across rain-streaked windows, but none of them looked warm anymore. They looked like reminders, tiny electric truths glowing where illusions used to live. Dad sat in the passenger seat, hands clasped together, watching the world blur past. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was earned. When we reached his house, he stayed in the car a moment, staring at the dark porch light. "You think I went too far?" he asked finally. I looked at him. "No, Dad. You went just far enough." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "I didn't mean to embarrass him." "You didn't," I said. He did that to himself. Inside, the house felt different, lighter, though nothing had changed. The tree still glowed in the corner, but the space no longer reeked of obligation. I brewed tea while Dad opened the window, letting in the smell of snow and wet pine. For the first time in years, he didn't rush to fill the air with apologies. He just sat, calm, reflective, his eyes steady. "You know," he said, "I always thought patience was the same as peace. Turns out it's not." I smiled faintly. Peace doesn't come from waiting. It comes from choosing. My phone buzzed. Another text from Tucker. "We need to talk." Then another. "Please answer." The kids are confused. I set the phone face down on the counter. The old me would have replied instantly, soothed his guilt, patched the wound before it festered. But tonight, I wasn't their repair system. I'd retired from that role. Around 10, Emma called. Her voice was small but steady. "Aunt Claire, hey sweetheart, Mom's crying. Dad's just sitting. It's weirdly quiet here." "It's okay to let it be quiet," I said. Sometimes silence tells the truth louder than words. She hesitated. "Grandpa looked happy on TV, like he used to be." My throat tightened. "He was. Can I come see you tomorrow? You don't even have to ask." After we hung up, Dad chuckled softly. She always was the smart one. I smiled. "Runs in the family." He gave me a look. "You got your mother's stubbornness. And her aim." "Aim. You never miss when you decide something." He leaned back in his chair. "I'm proud of you, Claire." I hadn't realized how long I'd waited to hear that. The words landed softly but stayed. We stayed up late sipping tea and talking not about the past, but about what came next. Dad wanted to keep volunteering. He said he'd forgotten how much joy came from doing something with no strings attached. I told him I'd join him at least until he got bored of me. He laughed. "Good luck with that." Just before midnight, I opened my laptop to check the news. The headline read, "Christmas Justice, Local Families Active Service Inspires City." Below it, a photo of Dad smiling beside me, hands still dusted with flour. The comments were relentless people praising him, offering donations to the kitchen, asking how to help. A few mentioned Tucker and Indy, but most focused on Dad's example. The story had found its heart and left the rest behind. I closed the laptop and turned to Dad. "You know this might not be over. They'll probably try to spin it. Say it was all a misunderstanding." He nodded. "Let them talk. Truth doesn't need a PR team." As we got ready for bed, I glanced at the empty space where gifts had been stacked days ago. It no longer felt like loss. It felt like freedom. Every package gone was one less chain around my father's generosity, one less disguise for dependence. Lying in the quiet, I thought of Mom again, her handwriting on that old recipe card. "Help them grow. Don't help them become helpless." I smiled into the dark. "We're growing now, Mom," I whispered. Finally. Outside, the wind carried a faint echo of church bells. For the first time in 2 years, I fell asleep without checking my phone, without worrying what I owed anyone. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen table like it was blessing a new start. Dad was already reading the paper glasses perched low on his nose, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "They printed it," he said when I walked in. Front page of the community section. The photo was of him handing soup to a child, the headline beneath it simple and perfect, "When saying no becomes an act of love." I poured coffee and sat across from him. The article described his years of service, his return to volunteering, his quiet philosophy about dignity and generosity. It didn't mention Tucker or Indy by name, but anyone who lived in Portland didn't need it to. Consequences have a way of finding their own voice. By noon, they did. A call came from Dad's financial advisor confirming the freeze on his accounts had taken effect. Don't worry, Mr. Thompson, the woman said cheerfully over speakerphone. Everything's secure now. The review should be completed by early February. Dad nodded, his voice calm. Thank you, ma'am. And thank you for treating this seriously. Another call followed from Tucker's employer. Apparently, his family emergency story didn't match the footage airing on local news. His supervisor had questions about ethics and transparency. I didn't feel triumphant hearing it. Just steady. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Balance restored. Later that afternoon, Emma arrived. She walked in with a bag of groceries and an awkward smile. I brought lunch, she said. Thought maybe we could eat together. Dad's face lit up. You didn't have to. I wanted to, she said, glancing at me. I get it now. As we cooked, she told us how things had unfolded at home. Indy had locked herself in the bedroom, alternating between crying and posting vague messages online about betrayal. Tucker had spent the night calling lawyers only to find out that every shared account, every auto payment, every card linked to Dad's pension was officially frozen. He's angry, Emma said, but he's more lost, like he doesn't know who he is without control. Dad stirred the soup, gently, eyes down. He'll figure it out, he said. Or he won't. Either way, I'm done teaching lessons the wrong way. Around 3, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find Detective Ruiz standing there, coat dusted with snow. Good afternoon, he said with a small smile. Just dropping off some paperwork for your father. It was the formal confirmation of financial protection, an official notice declaring Dad a victim of elder exploitation and assigning legal oversight until the case closed. We don't expect this to go to trial, Ruiz said. It's more about safeguarding and public awareness. He glanced at the living room where Dad and Emma were laughing over soup. Looks like awareness is already spreading. After he left, Dad turned to me. Is it wrong that I feel relieved? No, I said. It means the system worked for once. By evening, the phone rang again. This time, it was a reporter asking for a follow-up interview. We'd love to highlight how your active boundary setting has inspired others, she said. Do you mind if we film you at the community kitchen again next week? Dad looked at me, eyebrows raised. I smiled. Tell her we'll bring cookies. That night, as the house settled, I checked my messages. Dozens of strangers had written to thank us. One woman said she finally cut off her manipulative sister after seeing Dad's story. Another shared how she'd filed for financial independence from an abusive spouse. Justice had rippled outward, quiet but powerful. I walked to the window, looking out at the faint glow of snow under the streetlights. Somewhere across town, Tucker was learning that money doesn't replace integrity, and Indy was realizing that crocodile tears don't restore trust. Their punishment wasn't public humiliation, it was irrelevance. Behind me, Dad said softly, You know I used to think Christmas was about giving. It still is, I said, turning toward him. You just finally gave yourself back. And for the first time in years, he laughed, not the tired, polite laugh of obligation, but the easy, full-bodied laugh of a man free from debt, both financial and emotional. 3 months later, the smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the same kitchen where Silence used to live. March sunlight fell through the window, soft and clean, painting everything gold. Dad hummed quietly as he packed bags for the community kitchen, moving with the steady rhythm of someone who'd finally learned to take his time. I watched him for a moment before stepping in to help. You've become kind of a celebrity, you know, I teased. He chuckled. Marlo says they're still getting donations in my name. I told her to make it about the kitchen, not me. She tried, I said, grinning. But people love a redemption story. Every Sunday had become our ritual. We'd cook, deliver food, serve lunch, and talk with volunteers who'd once been strangers and were now extended family. What started as penance had turned into purpose. The kitchen walls, once drab and gray, were now covered with photos and notes, families thanking Mr. Thompson and his daughter Claire for reminding them what kindness looks like when it has boundaries. That morning, Tucker showed up. He didn't knock, he just stood at the gate, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, eyes unsure. I saw him before Dad did. You ready for this? I asked quietly. If I handled Christmas morning, Dad said I can handle this. Tucker walked up slowly, stopping halfway down the path. "Dad," he said. His voice was careful, the way you speak to someone you've broken too many times. "Can we talk?" Dad nodded. "Always could, son." "You just stopped listening." Tucker looked down, shame flickering across his face. "I know. I've been working on that." I stayed by the door, giving them space, but close enough to step in if words turned sharp. They didn't. Tucker took a deep breath. The review ended. "The accounts are cleared. I can't access anything anymore, and I won't ask to. I just wanted to tell you that." "Thank you," Dad said. No bitterness, just calm acknowledgement. "I got a job again," Tucker continued. "At a local garage. It's smaller pay, but honest." Dad smiled faintly. "Good. It'll suit you." Indy hadn't come with him. According to Emma, she'd moved back in with her parents after her public meltdown online. There were rumors of counseling, maybe reconciliation, but no one was rushing it. Some lessons needed distance. "I don't expect forgiveness," Tucker said, voice cracking. "I just want to understand how to start over." Dad nodded slowly. "By showing up. That's all I ever wanted." The two of them stood there for a moment, awkward but real. Then Dad motioned toward the car. "We're heading to the kitchen. You could join us." Tucker hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." When we arrived, Marlowe's eyes widened. "Well, if it isn't the prodigal son," she said lightly, breaking the tension. Tucker smiled nervously. "Trying to earn my apron." She tossed him one. "Then start by peeling potatoes." As the hours passed, the rhythm returned, laughter, chatter, the hiss of frying pans. Tucker worked quietly, not seeking attention, just doing the job. At one point, a teenage volunteer struggled with the soup ladle, and he stepped in to show her, careful and patient. I watched Dad, watching him, something unspoken settling in his eyes. Later, he leaned toward me and whispered, "He's learning." "Maybe we all are," I said. Near closing time, Emma arrived with her younger siblings. They ran to Dad, wrapping him in hugs sticky with sugar cookies. "Grandpa, we brought napkins," one of them shouted proudly. The sight was almost too much, the same children who once took his labor for granted, now learning how to contribute. The cycle had turned. Marlowe came over, clipboard in hand, smiling. "You realize, Claire, your family started something. We've had triple the volunteers since December." I glanced at the photos on the wall, one of Dad holding a tray, another of all of us working side by side. "That's how change works," I said, quietly at first, then all at once. When we finished cleaning, Tucker approached Dad again. "Thank you for letting me come," he said. "I didn't think I'd be welcome." Dad placed a hand on his shoulder. "You weren't, but you are now." It wasn't forgiveness wrapped in sentiment. It was accountability meeting grace. And in that balance, we found something stronger than peace. We found repair. It was late April when the thaw finally reached Portland. The city smelled of wet earth and rain-soaked cedar, the kind of air that carries renewal in every breath. I sat on Dad's porch that morning with a cup of coffee, watching him prune the rose bushes Mom had planted years ago. He still talked to her sometimes while he worked, a quiet murmur of memory that sounded more like prayer. "You think she'd be proud of us?" he asked, not looking up. "She'd be proud that you stopped apologizing for existing," I said. He smiled, cutting another stem. "And you, I stopped mistaking silence for peace," I said. We'd both changed. The house had too. The walls no longer carried tension. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and soap instead of exhaustion. The laughter that filled it now didn't drain, it replenished. Even Tucker had started coming by regularly, usually with Emma or one of the younger kids in tow. He didn't talk much at first, but he worked repairing shelves, mowing the lawn, cooking breakfast without being asked. Each small act was a confession. Each quiet presence an apology that didn't need words. Indy hadn't returned yet, but Emma said she'd started therapy. Apparently, she'd told her counselor I lost my image and my access at the same time. The counselor told her that sometimes losing both is how you find yourself. I visited the community kitchen twice a week now, sometimes with Dad, sometimes alone. They'd turned the Christmas photo of him ladling soup into a framed poster near the entrance. Above it, a quote from his interview, "When your truly needed time doesn't matter." People stopped to read it every day. I'd seen strangers cry beneath it, then roll up their sleeves and start volunteering. That's the thing about truth. It multiplies when you live it out loud. One Saturday after cleanup, Marlo gathered the volunteers for a small surprise. She handed Dad an envelope inside of which was a certificate naming the main hall the Thompson Room. The applause was thunderous. Dad's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother hiding. "This isn't for me," he said quietly. "It's for everyone who remembers that dignity isn't charity, it's equality." I recorded his words on my phone, not for social media this time, but for myself. The sound of his voice, calm, grounded, unafraid, was its own closure. He'd spent 2 years as an invisible man. Now the world saw him clearly, and more importantly, so did he. That evening, back at home, the family gathered for dinner. Tucker grilled fish on the porch while the kids set the table. Emma played music quietly from her phone, old songs Mom used to love. There was no forced cheer, no nervous chatter about gifts or money. Just simple conversation, steady laughter, the sound of a family slowly remembering how to be one. As the sun set, I stepped outside to the porch. The sky was streaked with violet and gold. Tucker joined me after a while, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "You saved us," he said. "No," I replied. "I stopped saving you. That's what saved us." He nodded slowly, understanding. "I didn't see how far we'd fallen." "You weren't looking," I said. "But now you are. That's what matters." We stood there in silence until Dad called us back in. The table was set candles flickering gently. When we sat down, he lifted his glass of cider. "To new traditions," he said. The kids echoed him, their voices bright and sure. After dinner, as I tucked Emma's youngest sister into bed, she looked up at me sleepily. "Aunt Claire, are we going to help at the kitchen again tomorrow?" "We are," I said, smoothing her hair. "It's our new family thing." She smiled. "Grandpa says helping makes you big inside." "He's right," I whispered. "It makes room for the good stuff." Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, I stood at the window and watched the moonlight fall across the snow-worn garden. For the first time in years, everything felt balanced justice. Peace, love, all in their rightful places. Mom's words echoed in my mind. Help them grow. Don't help them become helpless. I smiled into the dark. They're growing now, Mom. All of us. Because sometimes justice doesn't come as punishment. It comes as awareness, slow, patient, inevitable. And that was the real gift of that Christmas morning. Not revenge, not shame, but rebirth.